I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping lukewarm coffee when the envelope slipped through the mail slot. At first, I didn't think much of it. Bills, junk mail, maybe a card from a distant relative. But then I saw the elegant cream cardstock, the gold embossed letters, and my heart sank before I even opened it. My ex husband's name stared back at me. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper and I froze. A wedding invitation. He was marrying her, the woman he had chosen over me. The thought hit me harder than I expected. Memories I had carefully tucked away, the laughter, the promises, the quiet nights we spent dreaming about a life together, rushed back in a wave that made my chest ache. How could he move on so easily, so quickly? I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and an unexpected pull of curiosity. I hated him for the way he had walked out, leaving me to pick up pieces of a life I thought we shared. But at the same time, I wanted to see it for myself. For hours, I sat with the invitation, turning it over in my hands. My friends tried to reach me, checking in, sensing something was off. I finally showed it to them, and they didn't hesitate. "You have to go," one said, her eyes sharp with encouragement. "Not to fight, not to beg, but to show everyone, especially him, that you're still standing. That you've grown, that you're unstoppable." I laughed at first, a bitter, ironic laugh. Me? Go to his wedding? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she couldn't intimidate me. Not anymore. I had rebuilt my life from scratch. I had found strength I didn't know I had. And maybe, just maybe, attending this wedding wasn't about them at all. It was about me. The decision didn't come easily, but once it settled in, it felt like breathing. I would go. I would step into that room, not as the woman he had left behind, but as the woman who had refused to be erased, who had survived and thrived. I would walk in with my head high, every step a declaration. I am here, and nothing he has, or anyone else, can diminish what I've become. The moment I stepped out of the car, I felt the chill of the evening air brush against my skin, but it didn't touch the fire that had started burning inside me. The grand doors of the ballroom loomed ahead, polished and gleaming, reflecting a world I once thought I belonged to. But tonight, I wasn't here to reclaim the past. I was here to claim my presence. As I entered, the soft hum of music and chatter washed over me. Crystal chandeliers scattered light like stars, glinting off the endless rows of glasses and golden cutlery. Guests in expensive gowns and tailored suits moved with careful elegance, their laughter floating in the air like delicate ribbons. My stomach twisted for a second, not with fear but anticipation. I knew eyes were about to find me, and I wanted every gaze to linger. And then I saw her, the woman he had chosen. She glided across the room, her smile perfectly practiced, her posture flawless. I caught a hint of her smirk as our eyes briefly met, and it was like she was silently telling me, "You're not supposed to be here." But I wasn't here to argue or prove anything. I was here to exist in my own power, to show that absence hadn't broken me. It had shaped me. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the sharp red of my dress hug me just right, and walked further into the room. Every step I took seemed to ripple through the crowd. Whispers started, soft at first, and then louder as people realized who I was. I could feel their curiosity, their surprise, their admiration, even if they didn't voice it. Heads turned, conversations paused, and I smiled inwardly, not smugly, but because it felt good to be seen, truly seen. When I finally caught his gaze across the room, I noticed it. The hesitation, the flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. The man who thought he had moved on, who thought he had everything, suddenly looked unsettled. And I knew then that this evening wasn't just a wedding. It was my stage, my moment. I wasn't here to confront him. I was here to stand tall, to remind the world, and him, that I had survived, I had grown, and I was unstoppable. Every whispered question, every glance, every sharp intake of breath was a note in a symphony that was my arrival. And I let it play, letting every person in that room feel the weight of my presence without saying a single word. I could feel the eyes on me, but I didn't rush to acknowledge them. I let my presence settle into the room like a quiet storm. There's a different kind of power in silence, one that doesn't shout or demand attention, but simply exists, undeniable and commanding. And tonight, that power was mine. He was across the room, smiling at his new wife, oblivious, or maybe hoping I would be. I watched him, noting the little cracks in his composure that hadn't been there before. The confidence he wore like armor was starting to falter, just a little, under the weight of my gaze. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to confront him yet. Every glance, every subtle gesture I made carried more impact than words ever could. Memories flashed in my mind, not painful ones, but the ones that reminded me of my strength. The nights I cried alone, wondering if I'd ever be whole again. The mornings I pushed myself out of bed, determined to build a life that no betrayal could destroy. All of that had led me here, and the room could feel it, even if they didn't realize why. There was a radiance, a confidence that couldn't be bought or faked. I embodied it, naturally, effortlessly. I watched her, the woman who had taken my place. Her smile was still perfect, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. She was realizing, slowly, that she was a chapter in someone else's story, while I was the author of mine. She shifted, laughed nervously at a joke someone told, trying to maintain control. But I saw through it. The balance had shifted without a single word being exchanged. Even the guests noticed it, an unspoken respect, a recognition that I was no longer the woman he left behind. I wasn't fragile, I wasn't lost, I wasn't the past. I was the present, and I was commanding attention by simply being myself. I felt a thrill in that quiet dominance, a satisfaction that came from knowing I didn't have to scream to prove my worth. And then, when our eyes met again, I didn't flinch. I didn't falter. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty, maybe even fear. And for the first time in a long time, I realized the tables had turned. The power wasn't in his money, his status, or his pride. It was here, in me, silent, unwavering, and absolute. The speeches had begun, and I stood quietly near the back, letting the room fill with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Everyone's attention was on them, the couple, the perfect smiles, the glamorous lights reflecting off the chandeliers. But I wasn't part of their performance. I was the observer, the one they hadn't expected to see. And that gave me a strange, almost electric sense of power. As I watched him speak, my ex-husband, there was a noticeable tension creeping into his posture. He laughed at her jokes a little too loudly, leaned in a little too much, as if he was trying to convince not just her, but himself that everything was perfect. But I could see past it. I had known him too well. The cracks were there, subtle at first, like small tremors under a calm surface. I didn't need to do anything. I just let them exist, and I felt a thrill realizing he could feel my presence, even without words. Guests began to glance my way, some openly, some out of the corner of their eyes. Whispers started circulating, low and uncertain at first, growing bolder as they recognized who had walked into the room. The woman they had assumed would never return, the one they thought had vanished quietly, was here. And she was more than they expected. I could feel the shift in energy, the way people suddenly measured their behavior around me, unsure if they should admire, respect, or fear. I caught her eye, his new wife, and she stiffened. The composure she had carried so effortlessly all evening wavered under my gaze. She realized that the story she thought she was starring in was not hers to control. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My mere presence was enough. She shifted uncomfortably, and I felt satisfaction in knowing that confidence cannot be faked. It either exists or it doesn't. Tonight, it existed entirely in me. Then there was him. I watched his face as he noticed the subtle changes around him. People no longer focused only on him or her. They were watching me. For a moment, he looked genuinely unsettled. His perfectly measured words faltered slightly. I could almost hear his thoughts, frantic and confused. He had married her thinking it would erase me, thinking I was gone forever. But here I was, not just alive, but thriving, radiant, unshakable. He realized, maybe for the first time, that wealth and status meant nothing against presence, strength, and dignity. A wave of calm certainty washed over me. I was no longer a character in someone else's story. I was the author of my own life, writing it with every decision I'd made, every hardship I had overcome. And tonight, that story demanded recognition. The turning point wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies make it seem. It was quiet, subtle, unstoppable. Power had shifted, not with confrontation, not with anger, but with the undeniable force of who I had become. As the music played on and the speeches continued, I knew this night would be remembered, not for the vows or the glamour, but for the silent truth everyone now understood. I was here. I had arrived, and everything they thought they controlled had already slipped through their fingers. He found me eventually. Across the room, his eyes locked on mine, a mixture of guilt, awe, and something else I hadn't seen before. Fear, quiet but unmistakable. He approached slowly, as if every step toward me required a conscious effort. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I let him come, knowing that tonight, I held all the cards simply by standing in my own power. When he finally stopped in front of me, there was a pause, a silent acknowledgement that everything had changed. His words, when they came, were careful, measured. "I didn't expect you to come," he said, as if my presence was some unexpected obstacle. I tilted my head slightly, letting a calm confidence settle in my chest. "You never expected me to exist beyond your control," I replied quietly, but the weight behind it made him pause. He searched my face, probably looking for the same woman he had left behind, soft, uncertain, afraid. But I wasn't her anymore. I was composed, radiant, untouchable in ways he couldn't take back. Every gesture, every word, radiated the quiet strength he had underestimated. He tried again. I I thought you'd moved on." I let a small, ironic smile touch my lips. "I did. That's the point. But I also didn't think you'd build your life thinking mine could be erased. Life doesn't work like that." The woman he married shifted uncomfortably beside him, noticing the tension that wasn't there before. She realized, perhaps too late, that she was just a temporary figure in a story she didn't write. I didn't look at her. My focus remained on him, not out of anger, not out of desire, but because he needed to see the truth. I had become someone who couldn't be diminished by his choices, someone whose presence demanded recognition without a single word of argument. He swallowed, awkward and flustered. A side of him I had only seen once, long ago, and I realized in that moment that confrontation wasn't about proving a point. It was about showing him silently and firmly that the past could no longer define me. He had married another, thinking he held the power, but the real power, the quiet, undeniable, unshakable kind, was mine. I turned away before he could speak again, leaving him standing there with the weight of realization pressing down on him. The confrontation was complete, not with drama, not with shouting, but with the clarity of my presence. I had arrived, and nothing he could do would take that away. I walked out of that ballroom feeling lighter than I had in years. The night air hit my face, carrying with it a cool reminder that life continues beyond any one moment, beyond any one person. Inside, all the glitz, the music, and the whispered judgments had tried to cage me, but outside I felt free. The weight of resentment, of hurt, of what ifs, lifted, replaced by a quiet, unwavering pride. I thought about him, my ex-husband, standing there with that stunned look on his face, realizing that the woman he left behind was no longer the one he thought he knew. It wasn't revenge that gave me satisfaction. It was presence. It was dignity. It was the fact that I had built a life on my own terms. Money, status, even his approval no longer mattered. I was whole, complete, untouchable in ways he could never control. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The nights of tears, the moments of doubt, the times I wondered if I'd ever feel powerful again. Every struggle had forged me. Every heartbreak had sharpened me. I had learned that resilience isn't loud. It's steady, quiet, and invisible to those too impatient to notice. But it leaves a mark that can't be ignored when it finally emerges. And then I thought about the lessons I had learned that night. Presence is louder than any words, and self-worth is the most potent force of all. He had tried to erase me, but I had survived and thrived. The power wasn't in confrontation, in revenge, or in humiliation. It was in knowing your value, in standing tall, and letting life reflect your strength without needing anyone else's validation. As I walked down the street, the city lights glowing around me, I felt a sense of calm certainty. The past was no longer a chain, it was a foundation, and I could step forward into anything, anyone, anywhere, and remain untouchable. I had learned that true triumph doesn't need applause, it needs self recognition. To anyone watching, I want to say this: don't wait for someone to realize your worth. Don't depend on their approval or pity. Build yourself, grow yourself, love yourself fiercely, and let life reveal your power in its own time. The woman I once was is gone. The woman I am now, strong, radiant, unshakable, is just getting started.